Hi guys, it's Weedit, and I want to go over a few things about pores and basically 5 ways that you can really work to make your pores better. And it's not a lot of effort, it's just using a few tools. The very first thing is number one, so to speak, color theory does matter. Now, I like to use a color wheel because it tells me if I've got red and I add blue, I can expect to get this lovely purple. But if I go over and I've got orange and blue, I'm going to get this. If I'm doing a pour and I don't want brown, then these are two colors that I shouldn't use together. The color wheel helps you kind of give you a baseline. Now, the reason I'm saying a baseline is I'm going to go a little bit more in depth than just the color wheel and talk about, you'll have to know the actual colors itself. But the color wheel is really great because, and this one is Utrecht, and I'm probably not pronouncing that right, but it does go in and explain monochromatic, analogous, complementary. I like monochromatic, I like analogous because those are analogous are colors that are adjacent on the color wheel, and I know that they will look good together, and when I mix them or they mix in the pour, they're not going to make mud. So I like that. Monochromatic is really cool. Having different shades of, say, or different tints, tones, or shades of just one color. So this one, color wheel, usually on the back it'll have the different types there are. There's split, complementary, triad, tetrad. Yeah, there's a whole lot. But this helps you pick out colors that do look good together, and this can help you figure out, am I likely to get mud? If I am, is that okay? Because sometimes it's good to have that calmer color in your pour. So, color wheel helps you a lot. You do need to know a little bit about color theory. You don't have to study it and become a master at it. The second thing, the first one was, make sure your colors are harmonious, that they're going to look good together. Color wheels help you with that. The second thing that I like to do is to make sure that when I'm doing a pour, I'm using either warm colors or cool colors. Now, I'm not talking about if here's my color wheel, one side is generally warm and the other side is thought of as cool, but there's more to it than that, because a yellow green is going to be a warm green and a blue green is going to be a cool green. What I'm talking about is if I use a cool yellow, then I want to pair it with a cool blue. I want to use colors that are either warm or they are cool, because I think it improves the vibrancy overall of the pour. Again, that's not an absolute. For everything I'm saying, there are exceptions. But in general, if you're not sure, these are some good things to go by. So make sure your colors are harmonious. Look at the temperature of your colors. The third thing is to make sure that you have different values. Now, value is basically, let's see, value 1 here, according to them, I think of black as being a high value, but here they've got it as a low value. But you want some really dark and then some really light. You don't want everything right in, say, these 3 right here. Okay, that's boring. You want some contrast in there. So you want to make sure that you don't have all bright colors that are about the same value, because that's competing. They're competing against each other. They're not helping one another out. And the eye gets a little overwhelmed. So it's good to have some differences in value. Again, there are ways to work around that. So please bear in mind, these are so not absolutes, but different values. That's something that I look for. The other thing is, I actually check the colors out and see how they're going to mix. I started doing that. That's a lesson learned the hard way. I got a blue and I got a green and I mixed them, and I thought, yes, I mean, I got a blue and a yellow, and I mixed them, and I thought, oh, yes, yes, green, that'll be fine. No, I got mud. And that's when I actually had these books, color mixing recipes. And here's one, another color mixing recipes. And I actually started using them after I did this. But to show you what I'm talking about, here, this is zinc yellow and phthalo blue. And if you mix zinc yellow and phthalo blue, you get something around these greens. Those are lovely. I would be thrilled with that. What I did, oh, not cat orange. Where is, there it is, sorry, on this side. Ultramarine blue and yellow ochre. Okay, it's a blue, it's a yellow, and this is what I got. That's not what I wanted, okay? That's not the green. That is a green. It's a very valuable green. It would be great in shadows for a warm object, but not in my pour. So sometimes it's best to, if I'm going to use these colors, go ahead and mix them and see what they're going to look like when they are actually mixed. So that's it for color theory, and that was just make sure your colors are harmonious. Maybe try to stick to warm colors or cool colors to keep that vibrancy. Make sure you've got different values, some really light and some dark. And then check your colors, because you might be thinking you're going to get green because, blue and yellow, right? Not always. May not be the green that you want. I think that's a better way to say it. The second big thing to know is to know your mediums. And I'm going to let y'all look at this because this is actually a non-example, but while we're here, I will show you. This has got some really deep, intense black spots, and then some really, really white areas. And that's what I mean by have some differences in the value. Now, the rest of this turns into sort of a gray mush, although there's, I'm not sure that's really picking up. There's some sparkly purple, and there's, whites and darks and stuff, but there's a lot of gray, and that's because I really had too much silver in this pour, so there wasn't as much contrast as I would like. This was actually the very first pour I ever did. It was done with craft paints. So there you have it. That's the very first one. The second big thing to know is to know your mediums, all right? If you add alcohol to craft paints, it makes them thick and gooey. So I've stopped doing that. Floetrol will settle, and you need to shake it before you use it. It bonds with the paint. So if you're going to use Floetrol, you should take your paint, put the Floetrol in, mix it up, let it bond to the paint, then put in any additives. Thank you, Midgie. I'm sorry, my puppy is being annoying. So if you're dealing with Floetrol, know how to use it. If I'm using my DIY pouring medium, which is made with Elmer's glue, it's going to look cloudy, and I can't judge the intensity of the paints once I add that medium to it, and I don't know what the pour is going to look like until it dries. Elmer's glue dries clear, so that cloudiness dissipates. So know your mediums and how to use those. The next thing, well, and this is know your paints. So the third thing is to know your paints. For example, when I use liquid mirror, that's by TriArt, and I use it sparingly, but when I use it, I will get small spots of very intense reflective paint. It's liquid mirror. It's light and it tends to float up, and I only use just a little bit of it because it can be overwhelming. It is a very intense paint. The Pebeo, I think it's eggshell, that is a liquid. It's a prism paint. It has something in it that floats up and will slip over the surface of all the other paints, and it leaves it with a sparkly finish which is beautiful, but it also tones down the vibrancy of your colors. So that can be a great effect, or it can be a bit of a surprise if you don't know your paints. So know your paints and know what they're going to do. Titanium white is a heavy paint. If you are mixing your paints and weighing them to make sure that you get the consistent weights, then you'll work that out for yourself. That will take care of itself. But some pigments are heavier than others. So if you're not weighing your paints, that could be an issue. I don't weigh my paints because that's not how I'm trying to do my pours. Okay, so third thing was know your paints. So the fourth thing is composition matters. When I do my pours that I'm filming, I'm usually testing colors, testing mediums, testing combinations, but I need to pay more attention, even on my test pours, to composition, because I do things with those pours later. So composition does matter, even if you're doing a pour. And I've got 3 little visual aids. The first one is super easy, and this pretty much applies to anything. This is the rule of thirds, and basically you section off whatever substrate you're using. 3 columns, 3 rows. The intersections, okay, are going to be where it is most pleasing to have a focal point. Again, rules are made to be broken, but this is a generalization. Focal points are great right here and here. We tend to find a horizon line right in the middle to be kind of boring. It's more attractive if it's a little bit lower down here or higher. All right. The other thing is there's something called a golden ratio. It's can be illustrated, and without doing the math, because it's a 1.61, I think, is the ratio. Basically, it's saying that if we look, we don't like things that are necessarily square, and if they're rectangular, we like one side to be a little bit longer than the other side, not necessarily double. Rules are made to be broken. This is an example of using the golden ratio. It's also blocking off to use something called the golden spiral, which is a Fibonacci number, a Fibonacci series, and it produces this. And so here's the spiral. Here's the spiral translated, and they're mirror images. What I'm showing you are mirror images of each other. Maybe I should zoom out. I can't zoom out. Okay, here's the spiral, and there it is in rectangles. And basically it's just saying that we kind of like it when our eye is traveling along a path like right here. A lot of times you'll see this kind of flipped over, and you might have a girl laying down here, her feet are up here, and the focal point, her head, is right here. This area is negative space. It gives our eye somewhere to rest. It's not so constantly busy. But if things kind of follow in here and pull us into a focal point that's right here, or if they pull us into a focal point that's right here, we find that very pleasing. This is just a guideline, guys. These are just guidelines. The third thing that I would go over in composition is simply that you have negative space in your pour. This is what I am really guilty of. One, I don't do the rule of thirds when my test pours. I don't do any kind of spiral really in my test pours. So I'm guilty of not paying attention to composition. And as a result, I often don't have negative space to let the eye rest in. This is a very good non-example. There's not much space for your eye to rest. It's a little quiet here, it's a little quiet here, but otherwise there's stuff going on everywhere. It gets a little overwhelming and you don't know exactly where to look. Also, as you can tell, this has no real composition to it. It's just there. It is what it is. Now, do I like this? Yeah, I do. Even though it's just craft paint, even though it's the first thing I did, even though I didn't pay attention to anything, I still like it. So I'm just giving guidelines. This is not a work of great art. I do still like it. Finally, the very last thing to keep in mind is about drying. And you kind of have to know your region. I don't have too many problems where I live, which is in the deep south, because it's very humid here. So I don't have to worry about my paint drying too quickly. If you're in a dry area, then there are a few things to be aware. No matter where you are, thick paint is generally going to crack. So if you watch people who are doing pours, you'll see them tilt the canvas and they're dumping paint off. Well, there's a reason why they do that, and that is they're getting the pour, but they've got to get rid of some of the paint. They can't leave it all on the canvas or it will crack as it dries. If you've got too much water, if you've used too much water to thin down your paint, then you'll get tiny, tiny crazing cracks. You're prone to, you won't always, but you're prone to get, if you've got too much water, that crazing cracks. That can be a very good look. If that's what you want, add too much water, or add a lot of water, I should say, to your paint. If that's what you don't want, then try to avoid putting a whole lot of water in there. Dry your canvas slowly. If you're having a problem with cracking, you really do want to dry it slowly. Cover it with something else, not directly on top of the paint, but put a box on top of it, anything that will help slow down the drying on your paint. I haven't had any problems with cracking, but again, I live where humidity is like 110%. Now, finally, the very first thing that if you forget everything else, just remember one thing. If you do pours, you're going to get bad pours. It's just going to happen. There is a pour that Anne-Marie did, Anne-Marie Ritterhoff. I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly. If I can find it, I'll try to link below. But she had a pour that was her topmost watch pour, the favorite pour. It's a favorite, and it turned out absolutely gorgeous. She tried to go back and duplicate it. She did everything she did the first time, and it turned out a disaster. The first time it was vibrant, the colors were strong and clear and just gorgeous. And the second time that she did it, when she duplicated it, did the exact same thing over again, she got mud. She just got mud. I mean, it happens. It's going to happen. So it's almost like a crapshoot when you do a pour. You've got to be prepared. There will be bad pours. Just gesso over them and go on. I hope you found that helpful. If you would, please subscribe, hit that like button, the thumbs up, and come back for more. Bye, guys.